Welcome aboard again, this is Musashi. Today we're looking at the M2 Bradley versus the FV510 Warrior, two AFVs that are going to be in armored warfare. Actually, the Bradley already is. The FV510 Warrior was one of the new Tier 7 tanks announced for the second stage of the early access. So again, this information is all about early access, or at least this stage of it. I will warn you, there is no gameplay footage here. The Warrior is not even out for the North American server. We just have seen it, but no one's actually had a chance to play it, so there can't possibly be any gameplay footage. The point is, I think of the Bradley and the Warrior as being comparable. That the Warrior is the British Bradley. And some of you may not be familiar with the Bradley or the Warrior, so I'm going to see if Obsidian is justified in making the Warrior a Tier 7 and the Bradley a Tier 6. Also, some of the reason I focus on sort of the real vehicles versus the in-game vehicles, even when I have gameplay footage, is I want people to get a sense for the game is translating these things into a fun arcade-like game, but is trying to stay true to the vehicles themselves. And when you have a grip for what the vehicle itself can do and what the stats are of the real deal, I think it's easier to look at the game version of it and either not be as critical or be more understanding of how they've arrived at that, because in general, I've been incredibly impressed with their translation of real vehicle into the game, and still somehow it's amazingly fun. But let's see if that holds up with this Tier 7 versus Tier 6 thing with the Bradley and the Warrior. So here's our American M2 Bradley. This vehicle is highly coveted by several players I know in the game who are really looking forward to getting their hands on this thing. The M2 Bradley and the FV510 Warrior they're definitely comparable in age frame. There's lots of versions of the M2 Bradley and of the Warrior, improvements, more modern incarnations of these, but the two that we're talking about in the game are absolutely contemporaries of each other. They're the same timeline of tech. So the Tier 6 and 7 is not explained by one being a higher grade than the other. Now, we haven't seen the modules for the Warrior, so that's the beauty of what they've done here. They can tweak and add on components, and we don't know what the retrofit system's like, but let's just look at the vehicles as we know them. So let's take a look at the in-game dealer trees. The important thing to notice when looking at the tech trees here are the two categories that they've separated the AFVs into. There's the fire support vehicle that the Bradley falls in, and then the Warrior is in the recon section. And that's very instructive to how they anticipate these tanks are going to act and behave in the game. But let's compare both vehicles head to head here. Alright, so Bradley's on the left, Warrior's on the right. You see the Warrior's significantly faster than the Bradley. It's lighter by 5 tons, and it goes a lot farther due to its lightweight. Maybe it holds more petrol, I'm not sure. But anyway, in this game, how far it can drive isn't going to matter. The power to weight ratio is pretty similar, which is kind of unexpected, right? They both have torsion bar suspensions. You see the clearance is significantly better for the Warrior. Whether, again, they're able to model that or it feels different in the game is hard to say. The engine is similar. The Warrior's got a little less horsepower. But one of the big differences between the two is the transmission. The powertrain on this thing is, look at that, 3 forward and 1 reverse for the Bradley and 4 forward and 2 reverse for the Warrior. And reverse is not to be underestimated. Being able to go back and forth in this game and peek-a-boom and all that stuff, the reverse can be very powerful in the speed of the game that we've been facing so far in armored warfare. So I think that difference in the transmission could easily represent a mobility advantage that could warrant it being at one higher tier. Then we've got what most people care about is its main gun. And the Bradley has a 25mm Bushmaster, does 200 rounds per minute. The Warrior has a 30mm, which is significantly larger, but it only does 90 rounds per minute. The Bradley's on a belt-fed system, so we can put out 200 rounds before it needs to reload. The Warrior uses a 2-3 round clip sequence that normally is single shot, but you can turn it on to sort of auto mode and pump out 6 rounds, which they just released new patch notes that the Warrior was going to do exactly this. It was going to be able to fire 6 rounds. Then there was like a reload of 6 seconds. I forget what the stats were, but they're using the traditional Rarden gun for the Warrior here. One of the things the Rardin does gain as an advantage from this sort of one-shot business is just accuracy. It's supposed to be able to hit within 1 meter anything out about 1,000 meters, so it's a highly accurate gun. I think this presents us a really good opportunity to look at what is the difference between a 25 millimeter and a 30 millimeter shell. So again, the M2 Bradley is using a 25 millimeter belt-fed system, and the ammunition looks like that. Look at the size of that sucker. A lot of people in armored warfare don't believe that the 25 millimeter and the Bradley or other ammunition of its ilk can do any real damage to a main battle tank, which is absolutely untrue. Proven in the Gulf War, the Bradleys took out many tanks as well as some T-72s even. But it's not just been proven on the battlefield. This is one of those things when you're actually in a tank, you just get the sense that if somebody was peppering me with these things, there's all sorts of bad stuff that can happen to you and be very difficult to focus on your primary mission at that stage. The game is not trying to model morale or crew freaking out when they're getting shot with this stuff, but from just an equipment standpoint, 25 millimeter or 30 millimeter rounds being fired at your tank, even if they don't penetrate your tank, the M1 is a good example. There's so many electronic sensors on that thing. You've got vision ports that are bulletproofy type glass, but they're not going to stop this thing. So there is a lot of stuff you can bust. And you would certainly rattle the crew badly if this was getting thrown at you all the time. Of course, as a tanker, you don't want to get shot with main gun rounds and all sorts of other stuff you don't want to have happen to you. But you also don't want to get shot with these things either. This is not something you want coming at you. Even at the 25 millimeter, I think you lose track of that in the game, that these things are powerful. Especially in the case of the 25 millimeter, these things are belt-fed. They don't just come at you one at a time, like a main gun round every 6 seconds or whatever it is. I mean, this thing's going rat-tat-tat-tat on you as up to the tune of 200 of them, and then they can reload. So I'm not trying to make them out to be, an absolute giant tank killer, but I think generally in the game, the population doesn't give them enough credit. I do agree with the HE shell damage nerf sort of globally. It's going to hurt tanks like the BMD-1 and the BMP-1, but in general, I think it's necessary that you do represent more that these things are messing with you a little bit more than they're penetrating and truly taking you out in sort of large chunks of damage. This 25 millimeter round is used by a lot of different things in the U.S. service arsenal. This happens to be a Navy guy on the screen here. But let's take a look at the Warrior. Again, the Warrior doesn't get a belt-fed system. It only has these 3-round clips. There's 2 of them, so they get 6 rounds. But let's take a look at the difference between a 25 millimeter. Oh, look at that. Come on now. That's impressive. That's starting to look like a main gun round, right? I mean, it's okay. It's still not the size of a 120 millimeter main gun round shell, but you gotta admit, doesn't that look a heck of a lot bigger than maybe you would have expected had you not ever seen or compared these things? Look at the size of those things. Even with only 6 of them. The fact that 6 could be thrown at you relatively quickly just looks intimidating to me in terms of just the sheer size. And of course, when you look at what the penetration of these what these shells are, it is impressive. The newest Warrior, not the ones we're talking about, but the newest, latest, greatest one they've come out with has a 40 millimeter cannon that looks kind of similar to this thing, and actually it takes up the same space the 30 millimeter ones do. And the penetration on that is, I don't know, like 176 millimeters. I mean, it's up there. So the 30 mil not only does more damage, but its penetration values are significantly higher than the 25 millimeter. But let's take a look at the actual vehicle, and you get an impression yourself of how this works. Let's take a look at the tow missile for the Bradley first. This is out in Grafenwehr, Germany. I spent a lot of time in Graf. If you were stationed in Germany in a tank unit, you know all about this. Lots of mud, very, very muddy. But anyway, let's just take a look at what this tow missile looks like firing at a live fire range. Here's something you rarely see, which is actual crew members reloading the tow missile. And if you pay attention, you'll see the little, the wires come. It's wire guided, so the little strings come out of it, right? So the very ending part is sort of a thicker cord, and then the wire comes out from there. And they can fire these over and over without that wire or the cord interfering with reloading. They don't have to clean it out of there. It's very interesting to see them actually reload this. It's very unusual footage to see. Of course, these guys aren't doing combat loads. They're at a firing range and they're more concerned about safety than actually engaging, live targets. So they wouldn't normally reload that way in a combat situation. All right, but now let's take a look at the Bradley's 25mm cannon. We'll take a listen to how this thing sounds. Oh, and by the way, when you're on a live fire range, you have a green and a red flag. And so red is when you're active and hot, and you're about to fire, like this guy. That's the coaxial machine gun. That's not the 25mm there. That's the 25mm. Here's the the gunner station. So you can kind of see what the gunner's just got a little joystick there, and obviously a lot of their electronics too. Alright, so you get the idea of the sounds and how the 25mm works. Now let's take a look at the Warrior. Again, we got a 30mm with that significantly larger round that doesn't have 200 shots to shoot, but again, 6 of these might be plenty. Well, let's take a look. Oh, boom, boom. See, that's a lot different. See, that sounds like almost like a main gun round, right? I mean, the difference between 25mm and 30 in terms of the size of the round, the sound of it, the impact, I mean, it's gigantic, the difference. So these 30mm rounds can do significant damage and have significant pen to all types of armored vehicles. It's not to say that the 25mm again is not formidable, as I said before, but the 30 is a whole different animal. The guy's firing his coax machine gun here too. By the way, everybody calls it 30 Mike. They don't say 30mm. Hear that boom in between the machine gun fire? Yeah, that's your 30mm. That is exactly how it's going to behave in game with that 6-round clip. Boom, boom, just like that pace. So anyway, you can see the point there. It's very, very different. Well, let's take a look quickly again at the tech tree, because the main reason I believe this thing is going from Tier 6 to Tier 7 is the classification. So the fire support role is going with the Bradley. And again, we think the Bradley has tow missiles and the Warrior has no missiles. So we just spent a lot of time talking about the difference in the main gun round, but the tow missile makes the Bradley significantly more damage output oriented than the Warrior is in general. At least, again, the Warrior that we have that we're looking at. There are further incarnations of the Warrior that have missiles, but not the one that we're first running into here. And just the back of the Bradley there, just to show you its troop carrying compartment capabilities are pretty much the same between both vehicles. So far as I can tell, the up-tiering is primarily due to the 30mm's ability to penetrate and then do damage, and also its mobility advantages that we discussed in the beginning of the video. Still, I'm not sure if I want to lose the tow, though. That's a toughie. So they're both able to carry the same number, at least a lot of infantrymen, so they should both be able to be cap specialists, and maybe they will be. Again, we haven't seen the stats on that. but just in general, I believe it was able to be moved up to another tier because of the damage and pen of the 30mm can affect and damage higher tier tanks. And while that's true of the TOW, at least based on the missile play we've seen, it's not so easy to get these missiles on target, even a TOW. Another reason, we've already seen that the Warrior is significantly faster. It has that, again, transmission that is quite a bit better, and I believe it'll show up in the game as well on how that Warrior is able to shuck and jive and juke people out of position. Another big reason the Warrior is likely up a tier is just sheer protection. The Bradley has more side armor by its very nature, 30mm, where you've only got like 14 on the Warrior. But what you've got with the Warrior is a lot of applique armor that can be put on his modules, caged armor, and other applique armors that can make it significantly tougher on the battlefield than the straight M2 Bradley. One really odd thing for being at Tier 7 is I kind of assumed it was going to be, since in the recon it would have very good view range and camo, but we've already seen at least the preliminary stats for it, and it's like 0.23 camo and I think 390 view range or something like that. That is unspectacular. This is for the Warrior. That is very mediocre at best for both of those stats, so maybe it will be getting the cap bonus. Again, I haven't seen that. But based on the 30mm, its advanced movement, its possibly advanced armor scheme, I think there's plenty of justification to put the Warrior at Tier 7, even without having to talk about its future incarnations. Either way, I'm really looking forward to playing both vehicles, and I hope if you've not had any familiarity with the Bradley or Warrior, this has helped you some. Thank you again for watching Let's Play Armored Warfare. This is Musashi, and I'll see you next episode.